Okay, so well, we continue our course on data abstraction, object-oriented programming, and this is the first lecture on object-oriented programming. So we are finally here. We finished our introduction about C, and we will start today to understand what is this topic of data abstraction, which is the title of this course. So we have been studying a course for 3 weeks so far, but we don't know what is the meaning of the title, data abstraction, what is object-oriented programming. I will try to go over these today with a very simple introduction to classes and objects. And classes is the way that C++ implements الطريقة التي بواسطتها ال C++ تطبق ال object-oriented programming. And we'll also talk about encapsulation in today's lecture. طيب, this slide is from our first lecture. I had told you that in the past, maybe the beginning of the programming languages in the late 50s and early 60s, you write a program that is a bunch of a sequence of statements. خلاص? If you are here, you want to go back there, you write jump to this statement or go to this statement. Then you decide you want to go there, you say go to this statement or jump to this statement. And it was very difficult to debug, to find the problems, the mistakes in such complex programs as they became longer or bigger and bigger. So the next step in programming was the procedural or modular programming. You divide your program into smaller modules or procedures or functions. Depending on each language have their own name for this block of code. And then you have like a main block, a main function that will call those sub-parts, sub-functions, sub-procedures or modules of this program. You divide your program into pieces, and this is what we have been doing. In 100 was like this, one function only. Then 101 and until now in 112 we used the procedural or modular programming. But object-oriented programming has another approach, طريقة أخرى للاقتراب من الprograms, not by using procedures but by using objects. طيب. So what we are going to study is not new programming structures. We already studied the for loop, while, if conditions. There is nothing new that we are going to study, no new programming way, but it is a style, a new style of writing programs that makes writing programs supposedly easier من المفترض يعني. This is one thing. The second thing, easier to maintain, easier to fix the bugs, the errors, and the mistakes. So we are going to learn a new style of programming, and until now there are people who still prefer procedural programming. But we are going to introduce you to object-oriented programming. Then it is your choice. Number one, it is your choice if you want to continue with procedural programming or object-oriented. And if you read object-oriented code, you are able to understand it. So here we are an academic institution. So we want to teach you how other people write code. And it is your choice at the end to choose the way you want to write. So we're going to learn a new style of writing code that has many advantages, as we're going to show you now. So in modular or procedural programming or functional programming, objects consists of data, or we call it attributes only. And then we have our functions, our modules, our procedures that interact, تتعامل, operate directly with the data. This is what we have been seeing until now. You have a function returns some data and takes as input other pieces of data. So it takes some data as input and returns some other data. The functions outside the object, outside the data, directly interact, operate on the data type. How about object-oriented programming, which we are going to introduce today? Data attributes, and we call them member functions or methods, are the only allowed functions. The member function or the methods are the only allowed entities, الوحدات, that to deal with the data. And we encapsulate, نضعها كلها في one capsule, okay, into one object. Then the code outside the object cannot interact directly with the data. We protect our data inside the objects. It deals with the member functions that are allowed to deal with the data. So as I said, maybe you think this is like a longer way. Why don't the function deal directly with the data? But it has several advantages that we're going to interact. We don't want to corrupt, this data. We want our functions to be generic functions عامة. If we change the data inside, then we don't want all the functions outside to be modified. And this is why we put this interface. We can call those functions like the interface, واجهة التعامل between the data and the functions outside the objects. Okay, so this is the theoretical introduction. I tried to make it as simple as possible. Some important words. Encapsulation means that the data and the functions, member functions or methods that are allowed to deal with this data are enclosed, مجمعة, are contained, محتوى, in a single container called the object. And then you have the rest of the program, which is code outside the object that reaches, accesses, يمكنها الوصول to this data through those interface functions. خلاص؟ طيب. Without talking more theoretical, let's see examples, because this is how we learn better. We remember this example from last weeks, which uses a structure, student record, that has inner data, the fields, members. The data are strings and int, name and grade. This is the regular or the old approach, the modular programming or the functional programming. Where is the function here? The main function. We only have one function, which is the main function. The main function is allowed to deal directly with the data inside the object. Okay? So here we have one. Where is our object? Our object is S1. As we said, we have the type definition. And then we have that type, the object declaration or the variable declaration. This is where when we reserve some space in memory, and the functions outside the object are allowed to deal directly with the data inside. For example, we can use the dot operator after declaration, s1.name Ali, s1.grade 98. We can write the data inside the object directly, or read the data, also with the dot operator, directly from the object. What is the problem with something like this? As you remember, maybe in this class, and someone took a bonus point. By mistake, I had put maybe n small, right, in capital. What if I decide to change name and make it, for example, n small? Then all the functions that interact with this data should change everywhere. because the data is exposed, the data is open to all the functions. What if I decide to change the grade from int to float? Then I must be careful in all the functions that interact with this object to change grade from int to float. So this makes modifying programs much difficult. And for this reason, object-oriented programming languages were introduced maybe in the 70s by using what we call a class. So in C++, the object-oriented programming approaches are realized متحققة through the classes. Can you see any difference?
No.
Just a singular instead of struct. Now it became a class. But there are other hidden differences that we are not seeing here. And if you write this code on your compiler, you try to compile it, then you will find problems. So here class means that now we are defining, again, definition, class definition. We are defining a new class. Definition, does this mean that we are reserving any space in memory?
No.
Not yet. Okay. When do we reserve space in memory?
In declaration.
And at the declaration time, very good. At declaration time. So at this time, we have declared an object. So the object is the declared instance, is an instance, الكلمة اللي ما عرفتش أترجمها المرة اللي فاتت. Instance of this class. So we have the class, the type, and then many instances, S1, S2, S100, array of S. We have many instances تحقيق of this type. But we said that the purpose of a class is to hide the data inside, which means this data will become now private. Inside the object, you cannot reach it. So if you try to compile this, is it going to compile? If you try to compile this, you are going to get this error. Those lines, it is going to tell you student record name and student record grade are both private. Now we have a class. The purpose of the class is to hide the data inside the objects. So if you are hiding your data, then you are not allowed to access this data with the dot operator from any other function outside the object. So where should we put our functions, our methods? We should put our functions inside the object. So this is the new approach of encapsulation that puts the data and the functions that interact, تتعامل with this data all together in a single place. Of course, calling the function will be in the main or in other functions. But declaring the function will be inside the class. So again, this is just an approach of programming, style of programming that makes things more professional, more easier to write and read, and that satisfies the encapsulation and easier to modify later on. So this is the correct way of writing a class. The class will have two things: member data and member functions, which we call the methods. In C++, they are called functions. In other languages, for example, Java, they are called methods. So this is the member data, and those are the member functions. Only the member functions are able to see the data. So this is what I said in the theoretical introduction, if you remember. Now we begin to understand what I said. The member functions only can see this data. Functions outside, like main or any other functions, cannot see the data inside. You cannot use the dot operator. So we must define functions inside the class. We must define the function inside the class. And this is how I define my member functions. For now, the purpose of the member functions will be just to store the data inside the data fields and read the data from the data fields. So for example here, we're going to define two setters and two getters, two functions that set, تعطي قيم to the data, and two getters, two functions that get the data from the data fields. So the first one will be the setN. SetN, the purpose of which is to put a value inside the name through its argument. So it has an argument here, or a parameter, and this parameter n that is passed from outside is saved into name directly. Why is the function setN able to write values inside name? Because it is a member function. Similarly, we define another function, gsetGrade, that takes an int value g, which it stores, it assigns inside the member data field grade. So only the member functions can see the member data fields. And similarly, we have a getN and getG that read the name and grade private fields. They are private fields. Make sure you can see this word, private. And after reading them, what does it do? It returns those values, so they are returned outside the class, because I have no way to access the data directly. So I need those public functions. I need those public functions that allow me to access this private data. So the data is private. You cannot modify it from outside. It is protected. It is hidden. Member data, private, all the words you will hear about. Hidden, بلاش protected لا. Encapsulated with the functions. خلاص encapsulated كل ده. Encapsulated خلاص all together in a single class. طيب. Now inside the main which is outside the class, we can declare an object. Now we can declare our object, and then we can pass the values, for example, name Ali and grade 98, inside the name and grade through the functions. Now how do I call the function that is member of a class? I call it also using the dot operator. So it is still the same thing. Using the dot operator, I can call the member function. طيب, why am I allowed to call the member function, but not allowed to write directly in the field? Why is it not allowed to use the dot with the data members, but it is allowed to use it with the function? Very good. Because of those keywords. Because this data is private, so I'm not allowed to use it from outside the class. But those functions are public, meaning you can use them, you can access them from outside the class. Because if everything is private, then there is no meaning of using object-oriented programming. So you must have a few things that are public that are allowed to interact with the information that you want to hide. You hide something and you use some tools to access or to reach this hidden data. Okay? طيب. Here, I did not write private. I just wrote class, and but still the compiler said it is private.
Directly private. This is by default private.
Default, very good word. So the default is, what does default mean? تلقائي ساعات بيترجموه افتراضي. Default mean if you don't say it, then the compiler assumes يفترض. This is why we say افتراضي. يفترض that this is the situation. If you don't tell it that x equals 5, it assumes it is garbage value, any value. If you don't say it is public, then it assumes it is private. So the default values in a class is private. How about structure? Default in structure is public, because this is modular programming, not object-oriented programming. So in structure, even though I don't say anything, the default is public. But in classes, the default is private.
بس دكتور
Yes?
شنو الفائدة اللي قدمها حق البرنامج؟
ما احنا يعني واحدة we are going just to understand today what is object-oriented programming, and maybe class by class we are going to get the feeling, the meaning of what we are doing. But for now the purpose is to hide the data, not to allow other programmers, because for now you are writing the program all by yourself. But when you work in a company, you write this class and you give it to someone else, not this class, but the interface to the class, to adjust, to update the program. You don't want them to change the implementation that you did inside. Okay? In the coming lectures, I will try to give more and more examples to illustrate how it is important. And as I said, at the end, it is your choice, it is your decision to decide, do you prefer using object-oriented programming or modular procedural programming. So similarly here we can access the get of the fields using this dot operator and the public members. We have learned that by default, if you don't write private, everything is private. We have learned that if everything is private, then it is useless, because you can never use this class. So you must have a public interface. Sometimes they call it interface. Now, of course, you are not supposed to memorize those words, but since I will be using them interchangeably, يعني من وقت لآخر, sometimes I use this word, sometimes I use other word. So at least understand what I'm saying. And we must at least set a public interface that deals with this data by reading and writing. This is the basic minimum. Of course, we can add more functions. We can have some public methods and some private methods. The private methods, you don't want to tell your competitors, المنافسون, how you are writing this program. For example, you wrote your class in a very smart way, and you don't want to tell Majid how you wrote this class because you want to get better grade than him. So you keep it private, hidden. Only he can see the public members. خلاص؟ واضح؟ مقدمة سهلة. كفاية كده النهارده. عشان هو موضوع جديد. أيوه.
الآن ثابت الكلمة كلها ثابتة ولا الآن يتغير؟
لا, this is a name of a function. You can call it anything. What is your name?
لطيفة.
Latifa. So you can call this function Latifa, and then you call it the same thing. Set n Latifa. This is the name of the function. خلاص? Only name. Just call it a meaningful name, a name that we can understand.
إذا ما حطينا ست عادي.
ازاي عادي؟
لا هي اسم يعني ممكن تحطيها
This is a name. If you change the name here, you must change it in the call. This is the function definition. This is the function call. طيب تاني. This is the function call here. Yeah, please, if you have any question, because this is a new topic, I don't know how much you understand. So please ask me questions so I can update the lectures and update tomorrow's lecture, next بتاع بعد بكرة ده. This is the function call. Function call. Where is the function definition? Here. Where is the open brace? Here. This is the closing brace. So this is function definition. The definition of the function is here inside the class. I can define the function elsewhere في مكان آخر. but we are seeing the most basic simple class. أيوة.
دكتور قلت تقدر مثلا لو واحد بيغير الجرايد الانتجر للفلوت
أيوة.
لازم يغير في الكود كله. هني بس راح يغير في الكلاس لان الكودينج او الطباعه وهذا راح يصير بدون
طيب اسمك Haidar is asking me or suggesting why it is useful to use this. For example, now I have a string name and I decide to change the name as n small. As I said, if I do this, then I only need to change this n and this n to become n small inside the class, because the class is all contained محتوى in one block. But do I have to change the function calls? No, because the function name did not change, only the data. And for example, here I have an int. Maybe I want to make myself cool and I use int pointer. أبقى متمكن من البوينترز وأستعمل int pointer. I have to change everything here? No, I just change inside the function. Okay, so you can use any type of data or any name or any structure of data, maybe one grade. Then after that, you decide, for example, you are the teacher and you are teaching 2 courses. So I decide to have inside of one grade 2 grades, array of grades. If I make array of grades and I'm not using object-oriented, then I have to change all the main and all the functions that use this data. But here I will only change inside the member functions, and the main remain untouched, unchanged. Okay? And the other users don't care what is inside. Int pointer, int array, anything. خلاص? But I will give more examples in the coming lectures. We'll start يعني واحدة واحدة. Yes.
هو نيم او كي يعني هذا لازم نكتبه. الكي set والجيت.
يعني ده examples of functions, but it is strongly recommended, ينصح بشدة, to have functions at least that can read and write the data, the private data members. Because if you cannot read and write private data members,
لا مو هذا السؤال يعني الست والجيت هل هي مثلا كلمة
لا, it is not a reserved word. As I said, you can call it anything. You can call it لطيفة, you can call it شيخة, you can call it أنت مش هنسى اسمه بس نسيت. Because of Bashair, everyone who saw, many people got bonus points in the exam. Some people got 21 in the quiz. Yes, you can call it anything. This is name of function only. But when you name a function, it is a good practice, عادة طيبة, that you give it a meaningful name. Don't call it Tarzan. I don't know what is. Give it a name that implies you feed what this function is doing. Okay? So I call it set, but it is not reserved word. Not a reserved word. واضح؟
عندي سؤال.
ايوه.
السترينج جيت ان هذه يعتبر يعني عايده على شنو؟ اللي هو تحت.
هنا؟
لا فوق. سترينج جيت ان تحت الفويد تحت الفويد تحت ثاني فانكشن الفويد تحت هذا.
get n.
String get n.
String. What is this? String before get n. Any function should have a return type. Yeah. What is the type of the thing that is returned? It returns a string. Of course, here there is something missing, but this code compiled. What should I have included here? Yes, include. Very good. String. لحقت نفسي قبل ما نوزع بونس. But usually modern compilers, because everybody now use string, it is automatically included if you forget it. So this code, I tried it and it worked. So I forgot to include the string. But string is included by default, but a good practice to write include string. خلاص؟
لازم أعرفها قبل الريتيرن. قبل يعني أعرف نوع الريتيرن قبل.
طبعا. Any function is written as return type. Function name, parents, input arguments, input parameters. And a function should be written as this function does not take any input parameters. Why? Because it returns the name which is already here in the in the same class with it. Okay. I understand that you are confused. This is the first object-oriented class. I will give more and more examples during the next 2 weeks before our quiz, which is in after 3 weeks, before our midterm, which is in 5 weeks. يلا مع السلامة.